They say barns don't cry. But that night, it felt like my grandfather's century-old barn was weeping with me. The hinges groaned like an old man begging someone to listen. The wooden slats, soaked from a sudden storm, moaned with every gust of wind. And when I stepped inside and saw the destruction, my heart dropped into the mud. Someone had been here, not just been here, they had torn through it. The tools Grandpa lined up like soldiers were scattered, some missing. His antique lanterns gone. His leather-bound journals, the ones he never let out of his sight, were tossed aside like trash. And the smell, that stale, rotten sweet smell, told me someone had been squatting in here. Recently. But what hurt more than anything was the silence. This barn had been in our family for 4 generations. It was built by hand. Every beam carved by my great-grandfather, every nail pounded in by Grandpa before he even turned 16. It wasn't just a building. It was a story, our story. And now someone had treated it like a dumpster. I should call the sheriff right then, but something told me to wait. Something didn't feel right. The back door, the one that sticks, was open but not broken. Whoever did this, they had a key. But that wasn't possible. Grandpa only gave that key to one person. Me. The next morning, I didn't say anything. I just walked into the HOA meeting like nothing happened, sat in the back, listened while they argued about mailbox colors and hedge heights, watched her Karen. Not her real name, but everyone called her that behind her back. The president of our HOA, self-appointed enforcer of all things beige and miserable. She smiled like she was selling you something, even when she was reporting you. I watched her laugh and scold the Johnsons for leaving their trash bins out too long. I watched her tell poor Mrs. Everett that her shutters needed repainting again. And all I could think was, who has a key to my grandfather's barn? That's when I noticed it, just for a second. Her purse, a flash of something sticking out the side pocket. A rusted key with a red string tied around the loop. Exactly like the one Grandpa gave me. I didn't say anything, not yet, because part of me didn't believe it. Couldn't, Karen. Sure, she was pushy, controlling, the queen of passive aggression, but a thief. Still, I had to know. So I went back to the barn that night, alone, with nothing but a flashlight, my phone, and a heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the gravel crunching under my boots. I didn't go in right away, just stood by the old maple tree, waiting. 10 minutes passed, then 20, then footsteps. Crunch, crunch, slower than mine, heavier but deliberate. My breath caught as a figure moved through the trees, cloaked in shadows. I ducked down behind the woodpile, watched. They had a hood pulled over their head, black gloves, and they walked straight to the back door, the stuck one. It opened without resistance. I stood, my legs felt like stone, but I followed, silent, careful. Inside, the flashlight clicked on. They moved like they'd been here before, headed straight for the shelves where Grandpa used to keep his lockbox. That's when I stepped forward and whispered, looking for something. The figure froze, then slowly turned. The flashlight shifted up and landed right on her face. Karen. No hood anymore, no apology, just rage. What are you doing here? She hissed as if I were the intruder. My voice shook. This is my grandfather's barn. And then the smile, cold, confident, the kind of smile you give when you know something the other person doesn't. I have permission, she said. I blinked. From who? She didn't answer, just turned back to the shelf as if I wasn't even worth explaining herself to. That's when I saw it. In her other hand, a photo, faded, torn at the edges, but unmistakable. It was of my grandfather, standing next to her, smiling. Why was she in a photo with my grandfather? I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The image in her hand felt louder than the storm pounding outside. My grandfather, who never trusted outsiders, who guarded this barn like a sacred temple, smiling beside Karen. The same Karen who wrote him up for unapproved trellis height 2 summers ago. The same Karen who never once said a kind word about him in public. I stepped closer. Where did you get that? She slid the photo into her coat, Doesn't matter. My fists clenched. That barn belonged to him, not the HOA, not to you. She didn't even flinch, just gave me a look. The kind people give a dog barking behind a fence, mildly annoyed. Not dangerous, not worth the trouble. Then she said it. I knew him before you did. The sentence hit me like a slap. She didn't yell, didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone was cutting, final. I stared at her, waiting for a crack, a sign of guilt, an explanation. But all I got was her back as she turned and walked out into the rain, flashlight beam bouncing down the path. I should stopped her, demanded answers, called someone, but I didn't. Because in that moment, I realized something worse than her breaking into the barn. There was something I didn't know about Grandpa. And whatever it was, she knew it. The next morning, I pulled out every box I had from Grandpa's house. Old records, letters, photos. I flipped through dusty manila folders and yellowed envelopes until my eyes burned. I was looking for a name, a clue, her, anything that would explain how Karen had a key to a door only family could open. And then I found it. A postcard torn on the corner, dated June 1982. On the back, a single line in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. Kay, you always saw the best in me. I'm sorry I couldn't stay. M. Kay. Karen. My hands went numb. Had they, were they? No way. Grandpa would told me, right? I thought about the photo again, the way he stood next to her, relaxed, familiar. The way she looked at him, not like a neighbor, not like someone managing a complaint list. There was history there. And that history wasn't mine. I stared at the postcard until the words blurred. Somewhere outside, a buzzed. A kid screamed in the cul-de-sac. But all I could hear was the storm from last night, and the silence Grandpa left behind when he passed. He died 3 months ago, quietly, in his sleep. He left the house to me and nothing else, no letter, no stories, no explanations. At the time, I thought it was just how he was, private, stubborn, old school. But maybe it wasn't stubbornness, maybe it was shame. Or fear. Or guilt. I drove to the HOA office that afternoon. The door was locked, but her car was in the lot, so I waited. When she stepped out 20 minutes later, coffee in hand, she looked surprised to see me. Not nervous, not angry, just tired. "You're not gonna let this go, are you?" she said. I shook my head. She sighed, opened the door again, and motioned me inside. Her office smelled like lavender and printer toner. Neat rows of binders lined the shelves, every file labeled, every form color-coded. She sat down behind her desk, folded her hands, and said, "He wasn't always the man you knew." I didn't say anything. She looked down at the photo on the desk, the same one from last night. Only now I could see it more clearly. They were standing in front of the barn. She was wearing overalls, younger by decades. He had his arm around her shoulder. "We met when I was 19, she said. "I worked at the feed store. He came in every week." My chest tightened. "I know what you're thinking," she added. "But no, we weren't together, not like that. He couldn't let himself." "Why not?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Because he was already married." I swallowed. "He was kind, generous, but torn. Your grandmother didn't love the farm. She hated everything about this town. But he stayed for her, for you all. And I," she looked out the window. "I stayed too, quiet, watching his life from the sidelines." It was hard to imagine. The woman I'd known as a tyrant of HOA regulations, once in love, waiting. "But the key," I asked, "the lockbox?" She nodded. "He gave me the key after his wife passed. Said if anything happened to him, I should take care of what he left behind. Said there was something in the barn that needed to be kept safe." "What was it?" She stood, walked to the shelf, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, a stack of old photographs, some newspaper clippings, and a cassette tape. "Play it," she said softly. I stared at it, heart thudding. Because I recognized the handwriting on the label. "For whoever needs to know the truth." What do you do when someone leaves you the truth, but you're not ready to hear it? I held the tape in my hand for nearly an hour before I could even look for something to play it on. My fingers ran over the label 100 times, as if the words would somehow change. For whoever needs to know the truth. Not to my grandson, not to the family, just whoever. It made me feel like a stranger in my own bloodline. Corinne didn't say a word as I left the office, just nodded, like she'd been waiting for this moment for years, and now that it had come, it wasn't hers to witness. I found Grandpa's old cassette player in the attic. The plastic was yellowed with age. The play button stuck a little, but when I pressed it, the wheels turned. There was a crackle, a long, shaky breath, then his voice. "Guess if you're hearing this, I'm gone." I didn't realize I was holding my breath until he chuckled. That familiar low laugh, like he knew how uncomfortable emotions made him. I never talked much about the past. Didn't think anyone cared to hear about the things I've done or failed to do. The silence that followed stretched long. I could hear birds in the background, the sound of a screen door creaking. It was like he'd recorded it from the kitchen, maybe one quiet morning before coffee. "I wasn't a good husband," he finally said. "Not the way your grandma needed. I stayed loyal, but not always honest. I loved her. And someone else, too, all at once. And I hated myself for it." I sat there frozen, listening to my grandfather, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who whittled my first slingshot, speak like a man full of regret. "I met her at the feed store," he continued. "You know who I mean, I bet you do. She had this way of talking that made silence feel like a mistake, and I looked forward to Thursdays more than I should." My chest tightened. We never crossed the line, not really, but hearts don't care about lines, and that's where I failed. I should walked away, but I didn't. There was a pause, then the sound of a match striking. He was lighting one of those old pipe matches. I could almost smell the tobacco. "So I built the barn, not just for the farm, not just for tools, but to hide the parts of me I couldn't explain. That barn was my church, my diary, my confession booth." I blinked, stunned. The barn had always felt sacred, now I knew why. I stored everything in there, not just tools, letters, photos, even the cash I saved for years, hoping maybe one day I'd run, but I never did. He sighed. "After your grandma passed, I thought I'd make it right, but I was too proud, too afraid of what you'd all think, so I asked her to hold the key in case something happened to me. I didn't trust myself not to burn it all down before I went." The tape clicked like he'd switched sides, then continued. "If you're hearing this, you probably think less of me now. That's fair, but I hope you understand this." Another pause. I never wanted to lie. I just didn't know how to stop once I started. I wiped a tear I hadn't noticed was falling. "I raised you to be better than me, and you are. You see things, you ask questions, you don't let go." He chuckled again, a little softer this time. "You probably followed her, didn't you? Saw the key. Waited in the dark. That's my blood in you too, the part that don't rest until the whole story's told." And then a sound I'd never heard before. His voice cracking. "I loved you, more than you'll ever know, and I'm sorry I didn't leave you the truth while I was still breathing." The tape stopped. Just stopped. I sat there in silence, the player humming, the words echoing in my chest like thunder rolling far off in the distance. It wasn't just about the barn anymore, or Corinne, or some old affair. It was about a man who didn't know how to live with all the parts of himself. And now I had to. I went back to the barn that night, brought the box Corinne had given me, sat in the dust where Grandpa used to sharpen his blades, opened every envelope, every photo, looked for something, anything that would tell me what to do next. And that's when I found the deed. Not to the house, not to the barn, but to a separate plot of land. Address scribbled in his handwriting, coordinates attached. I didn't recognize the name on it, but Corinne would. And something told me, whatever lay on that land would change everything. How do you bury a secret and still leave breadcrumbs for someone to find it? The address wasn't listed on any county map I could find. The coordinates, scrawled in Grandpa's shaky handwriting, led to a dirt road just outside city limits, a place where the sidewalk stopped, and nature took the rest back. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even Karen. I needed to see it with my own eyes first. The tires crunched against gravel as I pulled off the main road. Dust kicked up in the... Ahead, the trees stood like sentinels, tall, still, watching. And then I saw it. A rusted gate, chained but unlocked, faded white letters on a wooden sign half buried in weeds. Lerkalo. I got out of the truck and pushed the gate open. It groaned like it hadn't moved in years. The air smelled like old leaves and damp earth. The kind of place no one talks about unless they're from there, and even then only in whispers. I walked past an overgrown path, past a field that might once been a garden. And then I saw it. A small one-room cabin, falling in on itself, roof sagging, door hanging off one hinge, and next to it a clothesline still strung, though the fabric hanging from it had rotted into threads. This place wasn't abandoned. It was left. I stepped inside and the floor groaned under my boots. Dust swirled in the light beams slicing through broken windows, and there, nailed to the wall, was a photograph. Faded, water-stained, but still clear enough to see. Grandpa younger, no hat, no smile. And beside him, a woman I didn't recognize. Not Karen, someone else. She had dark eyes, strong shoulders, the kind of face you don't forget. And she was holding a baby. My stomach dropped. No names, no date. Just a moment frozen in time, pinned like a secret someone didn't want to carry anymore. I sat down hard on what was left of a chair. My breath came in short, uneven bursts. Had he lived another life? This wasn't just an affair. This was a second chapter, a second family. The walls felt like they were closing in. I stumbled outside, the sun suddenly too bright, the air too thin. My mind raced through every memory I had of him. Every time he'd looked distant at holidays. Every time he walked away during family arguments. Every time I asked about the war or his childhood or his first job, and he changed the subject. He wasn't being secretive. He was hiding in plain sight. I went back to the truck and sat behind the wheel, gripping it like an anchor. I didn't cry. Not yet. I just stared at the cabin, the baby and the photo, and tried to decide whether I was angry, heartbroken, or just lost. But something in me shifted. I needed to know who she was, who they were, and if anyone else knew the truth, it was Karen. I found her in the garden behind her house, pruning roses like it was just another Tuesday. She looked up as I walked through the gate. "You found it," she said, not a question. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She set down the clippers, wiped her hands on her apron. "Because it wasn't mine to tell." My voice rose before I could stop it. "But you knew he had another, someone else, maybe even a child." Karen looked at me then, really looked, not with judgment, but with something worse. "Pity." "I didn't know about the baby," she said softly. "Not until after he died. I only knew about her. Her name was Lydia. He met her before your grandmother, before the barn, before the HOA, before all of it." I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. "They were engaged," she continued. "But something happened, something that made him leave. I don't know the details. He never told me that part." I remembered the tape, his voice, the way it cracked when he said, "I never wanted to lie." "Did he ever talk about her?" Karen nodded. Only once. Said she was the only person who ever looked at him without expecting something in return. The ache in my chest pulsed sharper. "So who was the baby?" She hesitated, then walked back inside the house, came out a minute later with a small envelope, yellowed, sealed. "He left this with me, said to give it to you if you ever found the cabin. I wasn't supposed to open it." My fingers shook as I took it. Inside, a birth certificate. Name Milo Harrison. Father Marshall Harrison. Mother Lydia. Born April 15, 1972. My knees gave out, and I sat on the porch step without meaning to. "Milo. My uncle." A man I had never heard of, never met. And yet somehow I felt the ghost of him in every corner of the barn, in every quiet moment Grandpa and I ever shared. The silence now made sense. Because it wasn't just silence. It was grief. Karen sat beside me. He tried to find him, she said. After Lydia passed, he looked for years, but Milo was gone, changed his name, vanished. Why? She shrugged. Maybe he didn't want to be found, or maybe he thought Marshall had abandoned them. I don't know. I looked down at the certificate again. The date. 1972. I was born in 1991. Which meant Milo would be around 53 now. And if he was still alive, somewhere out there, he had no idea someone was finally looking back. What do you say to someone who doesn't know you exist? I stared at the birth certificate on the table for hours. Every creased line, every faded stamp, it felt like a wound I hadn't earned. And yet it was mine now. Mine to carry, mine to understand. Grandpa was gone, Lydia was gone, but Milo. He was out there somewhere. And he had no idea his father had never stopped looking. The morning after I found the cabin, I called every Harrison in the county area. Dozens of voicemails. Some numbers didn't work. Some people hung up the second I mentioned the name Milo. I tried forums, obituaries, voter records, even the old yellowed town registry from the late 70s. Nothing. Until I searched the name. It wasn't much, just a record, a woman named Lydia buried in a small cemetery about 2 hours north. Died in 1981. The age matched, the location, it made sense. It was the year Grandpa built the back wall of the barn, the one he always said wasn't quite right. Now I knew why. He built it with grief in his bones. So I went. The cemetery was silent, humble, the kind of place where time stands still and the air always smells like pine. Her stone was simple. Lydia Grayson. 1948-1981. You are still the light. There was a small arrangement of dried wildflowers at the base, faded but recent. Someone had been here. I looked around, no cars, no fresh footprints in the dirt, but the flowers hadn't been there long. I drove straight to the nearest library, and for the first time in years I asked for the microfiche. Local news from 1981. Obituaries, funeral notices, anything. That's where I found it. A small paragraph. Milo, 9, son of the late Lydia, was placed into state custody after no next of kin could be located. No mention of Marshall, no note of a father, just a boy, alone, lost. The words blurred as I read them again and again. He must have felt abandoned, forgotten, like no one ever came for him because no one did. I slammed the drawer shut and walked outside, my chest burning. That night I sat in the barn, just like Grandpa used to, lights off. Only the sound of crickets and wind creaking through the rafters, and I spoke out loud, not really knowing who I was speaking to. Why didn't you find him? But I knew the answer. He tried. But by the time Grandpa finally looked, Milo had already become someone else. I kept digging, day after day, late into the night, until finally on a background trace using the date of birth, not the name, I got a hit. Michael Gray. Born April 15, 1972. Now residing in a town just 2 counties over. I stared at the screen, heart thudding. His photo was blurry, pulled from a business directory, but there was no mistaking it. He looked like Grandpa. Same jawline, same tired eyes. He ran a small carpentry business. Lived alone, no public social media, no marriage license I could find. He hadn't disappeared. He'd just started over. I sat on the information for a week. Couldn't bring myself to call, couldn't show up without warning. What if he slammed the door in my face? What if he didn't care? Or worse, what if he did? Because once the truth is out, you can't take it back. I asked Karen what I should do. For once, she didn't offer a list of rules, no protocols, no advice disguised as commands, just one quiet sentence. Tell him what you told me, the truth. So I wrote a letter. 3 pages, handwritten like Grandpa would done. I told him who I was, what I'd found, that Grandpa had searched for him, that he wasn't forgotten, that he was never abandoned, not by the man who built the barn. I didn't beg for a response, didn't push. I just left a phone number. And mailed it. Days passed. Then a week. And just when I thought maybe it was over, that my letter had gone into a void, my phone buzzed. One missed call. No voicemail. The number had no name. But I knew. So I called it back. The line clicked, static, then a deep voice, worn, cautious. This is Michael, you sent me something. I stood there in my kitchen, hand shaking, heart full of every possible outcome. Yes, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Then, almost in a whisper, he kept the picture. I blinked. What? The one of me and my mother. Did he keep it? I nodded, swallowed hard. He nailed it to the wall. Another silence, this time heavier, like something old and bitter was finally coming undone inside him. I never hated him, Michael said. I just stopped believing he'd ever come. My voice cracked. He tried, he was just too late. And then barely audible, almost lost in the line. I know. The call lasted 48 minutes. We didn't say much, just sat with the weight of it. A man who never had a father, a grandson who never knew the truth, and between us, a barn full of things left unsaid. Before we hung up, I asked him, "Do you want to see it?" He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "Yeah, I think I do." Some people knock like they're asking permission. Michael knocked like he wasn't sure he was allowed to be there at all. I opened the barn door before he could raise his hand a second time. He looked older than the photo, but not by much, grayer at the temples, a thin scar above one eyebrow, same jawline as Grandpa, same eyes, too, like they were always bracing for something to go wrong. We stood there in silence for a moment. "You came," I said. He nodded, didn't know if I would. I stepped aside. "It's yours to see." He didn't move right away, just looked past me into the darkened interior of the barn, the way someone might look into a church they hadn't prayed in for 40 years. He took a breath, stepped forward, and crossed the threshold. The wood creaked under his boots. And I swear the barn felt it. Something about his presence shifted the air, like the beams themselves recognized him. He ran his fingers along the nearest post, stared up at the rafters. His eyes took in everything, the workbench, the old saws, the chain Grandpa used to hoist things up when his back went bad. But it wasn't nostalgia I saw in his face. It was grief, delayed, disoriented, hollowed-out grief. "This is where he worked?" he asked, voice soft. "Every day," I said, even when he could barely stand. He paused in front of a shelf lined with old jars, screws, nails, rusted hinges. Things Grandpa swore he'd fix one of these days. Michael reached for one of the jars, turned it in his hand. "My mom, she used to say he made things with his hands because he couldn't fix what he broke with his heart." I didn't know what to say to that. So I just listened. "He was the kind of ghost that never left our house," Michael continued. "She never badmouthed him, never told me to hate him, but every time she looked out the window, I knew who she was waiting for." I swallowed hard. She died thinking he never came back. He turned then, looked at me for the first time fully. "And he didn't." I nodded slowly, not to her, but he didn't forget, he couldn't. Michael nodded too, like he wanted to believe that, like a part of him did. I walked over to the workbench, opened the drawer beneath it, pulled out a wooden box, the same one Karen had given me days earlier. Inside it, still wrapped in cloth, was the tape. "I think you should hear this," I said. He sat on the old stool, hands resting on his knees. I loaded the tape into the player and pressed play. I stepped back as Grandpa's voice filled the barn. That voice that had once been my comfort, now spilling truths meant for someone else. Michael didn't move, didn't blink. Not when Grandpa admitted he'd failed. Not when he spoke about loving two people at once. Not even when he said he'd searched and couldn't find him. But when Grandpa said, "I raised you to be better than me," I saw it, just a flicker. A crack in the armor. A single tear. Michael wiped it away before it could fall completely. When the tape ended, we both sat there, the barn buzzing with the echoes of the past. He didn't speak for a long time. Then finally, "I needed to hate him," he said, "for a long time, because it made it easier than asking why I wasn't enough." The honesty in that sentence cut deeper than anything the tape had revealed. I nodded. He didn't know how to love without shame, and by the time he tried to fix it, it was already too late. Michael looked around. "I guess this is what's left of him." "No," I said, "we are." He stared at me for a long moment, not with judgment, not even with recognition, but with something heavier. Acceptance. And maybe, just maybe, the beginning of peace. He walked slowly through the barn after that, ran his fingers over the carvings on the wall, touched the initials burned into the beam above the doorway, paused in front of the photo, the one of him as a baby in Lydia's arms. He kept this here the whole time. Never took it down. Michael nodded, exhaled. "He always said he built this barn to store the weight of the world," I said. Michael gave a soft, broken laugh. "Yeah," he muttered, "seems like it." Before he left, he turned to me. "I'm not ready for family," he said. "Not yet." "I understand. But I don't want to disappear again, either." I nodded, "Take your time." He walked to his truck, paused at the door. Then looked back at me, eyes filled with something raw and unfinished. "Thank you," he said. "Not for the barn, not for the letter. For knowing how to open the door and let the ghosts inside. You think that once the truth is out, everything will feel lighter. But it doesn't, not at first." After Michael left, the barn felt emptier than ever, like it had exhaled finally, but didn't know how to breathe back in again. I swept the floor, organized the workbench, rehung the tools Grandpa never got around to fixing. I even replaced the loose shingles on the roof, like maybe patching wood could patch guilt. But no matter what I did, something still hung in the air. Regret doesn't go away with closure, it lingers. The next morning, Karen showed up at the barn. No clipboard, no smug agenda, just a box in her arms and a strange look in her eyes. "I figured it out," she said, holding the box, "why he gave me the key." I tilted my head, "Because he trusted you." She shook her head, "Because he needed someone who wouldn't protect him." I didn't understand. She stepped inside, placed the box on the bench. "He knew I wouldn't hide the truth if someone came looking. He knew I'd be the one person who wouldn't let the lie die with him." Inside the box were letters, dozens, all addressed to M. Some were returned, others were never sent. "He wrote him," she whispered, "for years." The handwriting changed with time, younger, firmer, then shakier, more fragile. One letter caught my eye. It was dated only a year before Grandpa died. "I don't expect you to write back, but I need you to know I never stopped looking. Every broken thing in me was born the day I walked away from you and your mother. I tried to build a life around that absence, but it was always hollow. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I leave it here anyway, in case one day you want to pick it up." I had to sit down. Karen stood by the door, arms folded, eyes glassy. "I was angry at him for so long," she said, "for choosing someone else, for disappearing from me without ever really leaving." I looked up. "You loved him." "It wasn't a question." She nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks silently. "I think part of me always did." There was a quiet that followed, not uncomfortable, not heavy, just full. Like everything that had been buried for decades was finally breathing. "I want to restore it," I said suddenly, surprising even myself. "The barn, not just fix it, open it, tell the story." Karen blinked. "Open it?" "To the community, make it something. A memorial, a place where truth doesn't have to hide behind rafters and dust." Her face softened. He'd hate that. I laughed. I know, but maybe that's the point. Over the next few weeks, I got to work. Michael didn't say much, but he came by, dropped off some of his own tools, helped reinforce the north wall. Never stayed long, but he kept showing up. One day, I found a photo tacked to the beam near the back, one I hadn't placed there. It was of Lydia. Smiling, wind in her hair, eyes full of sunlight. Underneath, written in Michael's handwriting. For the ones who stayed, and the ones who couldn't. That day, we replaced the rotted floorboards together, side by side. Neither of us said much. We didn't have to. Healing isn't about finding the right words. Sometimes it's just about sharing the weight. Karen helped too. She brought in records, dates, even her own diary entries from the 80s. She offered to create a community archive, stories of people like Grandpa, like Lydia. Forgotten people, quiet people. The kind of people who build lives behind fences and carry pain no HOA rulebook could ever contain. We named it the Hollow Barn Project. Not because it was empty, but because it had held so much for so long. By summer's end, we had our opening day. Neighbors came, some out of curiosity, some in quiet solidarity. People asked questions. Michael stood near the back, arms folded, watching. I saw a few people try to speak to him. He didn't say much, but he didn't walk away either. That was something. At the end of the day, I stood alone inside the barn, doors wide open, the late sunlight stretching long across the floorboards. Karen walked in, handed me a small plaque. Legacy isn't about perfection. It's about what we leave behind when the silence ends. I mounted it to the main beam, right beneath Grandpa's old. Michael came up beside me, watched for a long moment. He would hated the attention, he said. I smiled. He also hated paperwork, and I still found 10 pounds of it under his bed. He smirked, then looked around, quieter now. You gave him back to me, he said. No, I replied, you came looking. Because sometimes, the strongest love comes not from waiting, but from finally choosing to show up. It's strange, the way some places change when the truth finally touches them. The barn doesn't creak as much now. It doesn't feel heavy the way it used to. Maybe that's just in my head, or maybe it's what happens when secrets leave a place, they take the weight with them. Fall came. The leaves burned orange and red, and the air started to carry that sharpness that makes you breathe a little deeper. The hollow barn stayed open. People started calling it that like it had always been its name. We didn't advertise. We didn't need to. People found it like we had when they were ready. Sometimes they came just to sit. Other times they brought photos of their own. Letters, pieces of the past they'd never known what to do with. We kept a wall in the back for that, the quiet wall. No names, no questions, just a place to leave the things you couldn't carry anymore. Michael brought one too. A photograph of him as a teenager, long hair, angry eyes, a note scribbled beneath it in pencil. I'm still learning how to forgive the man I became when I thought I was alone. He never said anything when he put it up. He didn't have to. Forgiveness isn't loud. It doesn't arrive with trumpets or banners. Sometimes it just walks in, lays something down, and leaves the door open behind it. Karen visits once a week, brings new clippings, archive materials. She jokes about how she broke 100 HOA rules just by allowing this place to exist. I think that's why she loves it so much. She keeps Grandpa's old ledger in the display case, the one he wrote in every day like it was a diary no one would ever read. People flip through it sometimes. There's not much in it, weather reports, feed counts, a recipe for cornbread he never got quite right. But on the last page, in faded pencil, were 7 words I hadn't noticed until recently. Hope lives here, even if I didn't. I don't know when he wrote that. Maybe he didn't even mean for anyone to read it. But I'm glad we did. Because that's what this was always about. Not exposing the past. Not righting every wrong. Just letting the truth exist. Letting it breathe. Letting us breathe finally beside it. One afternoon, Michael and I sat on the front steps of the barn, watching the wind move through the tall grass like it was trying to say something we couldn't quite hear. He asked me if I ever wished I hadn't found the key. I didn't even need to think about it. No, I said, even the hard truths deserve light. He nodded. I used to think silence was safer. It is, I said, but it's not honest. He looked out over the fields, the same ones Grandpa used to walk when his knees still worked and the sky was wide open. You think he ever found peace? I thought about the tape, about the picture, about the barn that held all the weight of who he'd been. I think he built it, I said. Michael looked at me confused. The barn? No, the peace. He built it with everything he left behind. That night after Michael drove home, I stayed back. Lit a fire in the old barrel. Let the flames crackle up into the dark. And I sat with the barn, with its scars, its silences, its stubborn beams and quiet redemption, and I listened. Not for ghosts, not for answers, just for the stillness. Because sometimes healing isn't a moment. It's a season. And sometimes the legacy we leave behind isn't in what we build. It's in what we let go. So if you ever find yourself standing in front of a locked door, holding a key you don't understand, wondering if opening it will break your whole world apart, do it anyway. Open it, because the story waiting on the other side might just be the one you were always meant to tell.